A woman enters a church before dawn, preparing to lead a fitness class. 30 minutes later, she's found beaten to death, surrounded by shattered glass and silence. The killer, caught on camera, but never identified. Who was the figure in police gear stalking the empty hallways before the murder? And why did they choose her? The floor was slick with blood, smeared into jagged streaks that shimmered under the harsh fluorescent lights. Shards of broken glass lay scattered across the tile, crunching beneath the boots of first responders as they stepped into a place meant for peace, now transformed into a scene of ritualistic violence. The narrow corridor of Creekside Church of Christ in Midlothian, Texas, reeked not just of iron and rain-soaked fabric, but of something colder, premeditation. At the center of this desecrated sanctuary was the body of a woman. Terry Leanne, Missy Bevers, a 45-year-old fitness instructor and mother of 3, had been found lying motionless, her limbs splayed in unnatural angles. Her lifeless form bore the unmistakable marks of overkill. Multiple puncture wounds to the head and chest, likely inflicted by a blunt object. Blood had pooled beneath her body and seeped into the cracks between tiles, like veins spidering through a cadaver. This was not the work of panic. It was the result of deliberate, escalating rage. There were no signs of a struggle in the immediate area. No defensive wounds, no overturned benches, no smeared fingerprints of someone fighting for her life. This suggested either a sudden, overwhelming attack or a psychological paralysis on the part of the victim. The presence of tactical gear, left behind not in fragments, but in the grainy footage recovered from internal surveillance, pointed to the second possibility. The attacker had entered the church in the early hours, dressed head to toe in what resembled law enforcement apparel. A helmet, gloves, a thick vest bearing the word police in bold letters. The gear wasn't military issue. From the recorded footage, it hung loosely on the suspect's frame, suggesting it wasn't fitted or professionally worn. This detail, subtle but telling, indicated that the outfit was assembled for disguise, not functionality. And yet, it had the intended psychological effect. Anyone encountering a figure like this in the dark, deserted corridors of a church might freeze, not out of submission, but confusion. The blend of authority and anonymity in the outfit made it more terrifying than a weapon. The nature of the weapon used, a hammer, revealed even more. It was crude, personal, and messy. Forensic examination confirmed it was consistent with the puncture wounds found on the victim, and, although several tools were present in the church, it was this particular instrument that delivered the fatal blows. That the killer chose not to bring a weapon, but instead used what was available, suggests a shift in intent. This was not necessarily a planned execution, but something that may have escalated unexpectedly. However, the details of the scene contradict the theory of a random burglary gone wrong. Nothing was taken. Missy's truck remained in the parking lot, with her purse, phone, and even a handgun untouched. Inside, cabinets had been opened, doors smashed in a seemingly methodical pattern, but valuables were ignored. The destruction seemed more theatrical than practical, suggesting the chaos was meant to stage a false narrative. The attacker moved with eerie composure. Surveillance footage showed them wandering through the church for nearly 30 minutes, peering into rooms, opening and closing doors, swinging the hammer not with desperation but a sense of purpose. The gait was unusual, particularly a right foot turned slightly outward, making the movement both clumsy and hauntingly distinct. The suspect did not run. There was no urgency, no hint of fear, only presence, dominance. From a criminological standpoint, these behaviors reflect a level of psychological detachment paired with symbolic control. This was not a predator in panic, but an individual exerting power over space and circumstance. The church, typically a haven, was reduced to a stage for one person's internal unraveling. The timing, the setting, the disguise, all calculated elements, yet distorted by underlying pathology. The absence of any attempt to remove evidence or flee swiftly strengthens the theory that the killer did not perceive an immediate threat of discovery. This points to familiarity, not necessarily with the victim, but with the environment. It is plausible the attacker had either scoped out the church beforehand or been there on previous occasions, possibly during hours it was open to the public. In totality, the crime scene spoke not only of violence, but of theater. It was a performance of dominance and control, cloaked under the guise of law enforcement, enacted in a place designed for worship, and finalized in silence. There were no screams caught on audio, no final pleas etched into voicemail. Only the soundless echo of footsteps, recorded in grainy black and white, and the quiet presence of death in a hallway meant for healing. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps us a lot. Thank you. In the days following the murder, investigators began the grim task of piecing together the timeline of the crime. Surveillance footage from within the church revealed that the suspect had entered the building around 3:50 a.m., nearly 40 minutes before Missy Bevers arrived. This meant the killer had not only broken into the premises under the cover of darkness, but had ample time to navigate the space, familiarize themselves with the layout, and prepare for an encounter. For nearly half an hour, the figure wandered through the building, moving deliberately from room to room, breaking glass panels on doors, opening office drawers, inspecting storage closets, and at times appearing to swing the hammer absent-mindedly, almost as if mimicking a search. What was striking in the footage was the sheer lack of urgency. There was no scramble, no fumbling with locks or panic in movement. The suspect behaved more like a person inspecting their own property than an intruder. The hammer, never concealed, became an extension of the individual's presence. It wasn't used to batter down entry points aggressively. Rather, it was applied to surfaces methodically, as if enacting a silent ritual. The person behind the gear did not appear to be looking for items of value. They were, it seemed, performing. Missy's arrival at the church occurred just after 4:15 a.m. She parked her truck under the south side awning, a familiar routine for her early morning fitness sessions. The rain that morning had pushed the class indoors, so she entered carrying workout equipment. From the surveillance timeline, it's clear that only minutes passed between her entry and the fatal encounter. She likely never saw it coming. The suspect had moved to the southwest corridor, possibly by coincidence or perhaps by intention, and from that point, the camera's motion sensor failed to record what happened next. The fatal attack occurred in a blind spot. She was found shortly after 5 a.m. by two of her students arriving for class. They discovered her lying on the floor, blood pooled around her body, her workout mat still unrolled nearby. First responders noted signs of blunt force trauma and shattered glass nearby, indicating a struggle or an assault with the very same tool the suspect had been carrying in the footage. Despite the efforts to revive her, Missy was pronounced dead at the scene. What followed was a flurry of confusion and grasping for answers. Police initially suspected the murder may have been the result of a botched burglary, but that theory quickly began to falter under closer scrutiny. Valuable items, both personal and institutional, remained untouched. There was no evidence of escape in haste, no overturned furniture or trails of blood suggesting a wounded suspect. The attack was swift, contained, and disturbingly clean in its execution. More importantly, the killer never reappeared on any of the surveillance systems. He, or she, entered quietly, roamed purposefully, struck, and exited without triggering further sensors. The building's layout was complex enough to confuse a first-time intruder, yet the suspect navigated it without hesitation. That suggested familiarity, not only with the space but possibly with the schedule of its occupants. Adding to the bizarre nature of the case was the suspect's outfit. Tactical gear, especially with police emblazoned across the chest or back, is not something casually obtained. While many items can be purchased online, the specific combination of vest, helmet, and gloves indicated either a deliberate effort to replicate the appearance of law enforcement, or perhaps even possession of equipment from a prior occupation. However, the ill-fitting nature of the clothing pointed toward impersonation rather than professional background. The outfit was intended to instill fear and mask identity, not to serve functional, tactical purpose. Criminologically, this impersonation complicates profiling. The individual could be someone with a fascination for power, for law enforcement, or with a grudge against institutional structures. The costume serves a dual function. It anonymizes and authorizes. A killer in plain clothes is a threat. A killer dressed like a cop is a psychological weapon. The suspect's movement, composure, and timing all suggest a level of control uncommon in crimes of impulse. The location, a church, adds another layer. Churches are not chosen randomly for acts of violence. They are symbolic, structured, sacred spaces. For the killer to defile that space with such calculated brutality indicates either deep resentment or an intentional act of desecration. There is ritual in repetition, and the suspect's actions before the murder bore traces of rehearsed behavior. Whether Missy was the intended target or an unfortunate collision in time and space remains uncertain. But the circumstances indicate that the killer was prepared for violence, if not specifically against her, then against whoever might cross their path. The presence of the hammer, the route through the church, and the demeanor captured on film all imply a mind that was calm, methodical, and deeply detached from empathy. It is this detachment that makes the case so haunting. Not only was the crime cold-blooded, but it was committed with an absence of emotional interference. No rage, no frenzy, just the echo of boots in a dark hallway, and a life ended before sunrise. The investigation quickly expanded beyond the immediate crime scene. Detectives began tracing every possible connection to Missy Bevers' personal and professional life, hoping to uncover a motive. Public interest surged, fueled by the strange, almost cinematic footage of the suspect and the chilling environment in which the crime had occurred. But despite the coverage and analysis, the case yielded few solid leads. Attention shifted to Missy's digital life. Her social media accounts, particularly Facebook and LinkedIn, became areas of interest. Investigators discovered that just days before her murder, Missy had received a message from an unknown male contact through LinkedIn. According to one friend, the message had unsettled her. Described as creepy and out of place, its content was never made public, but it suggested she had drawn the attention of someone observing her closely. Whether this message was linked to the crime or simply a disturbing coincidence remains unresolved, but it underscored the possibility that Missy may have been stalked in some capacity. Meanwhile, the deeper police delved into her private life, the more complex the portrait became. Missy, though deeply committed to her family and fitness instruction, was also navigating a strained marriage. There were indications of extramarital relationships, details confirmed by her husband Brandon during interviews with authorities. These revelations were not grounds for suspicion, but they expanded the pool of individuals who might have had a motive, whether emotional, personal, or retaliatory. Still, nothing pointed to a suspect with certainty. Phone records, search histories, and electronic data from multiple parties were examined, but no evidence emerged that could place a known individual at the scene during the window of the murder. Furthermore, Brandon Bevers was in Mississippi on a fishing trip at the time of the attack and was quickly cleared of direct involvement. No other person in Missy's circle could be tied physically to the church at that hour. The killer, it appeared, had entered and exited in complete silence, leaving no usable DNA, no fingerprints, and no trail. With no physical evidence and no clear motive, law enforcement turned back to the footage. Analysts studied the suspect's gait, the angle of the feet, the slight tilt of the head, the height and shoulder width, anything that could narrow down the suspect pool. Initial estimations suggested a height between 5 feet 2 inches and 5 feet 7 inches. Later, refinements revised that range to approximately 5 feet 8 inches, based on vertical reference points inside the church. Even this single metric caused confusion. It expanded the list of potential suspects rather than reducing it. Questions around the suspect's gender also added to the difficulty. The way the person walked, arms slightly extended, body rigid, led to conflicting interpretations. Some argued the figure was male, others believed it might be a woman wearing oversized gear. The indecisiveness wasn't due to a lack of effort or expertise, but the sheer ambiguity of the footage. Nothing about the suspect's movement definitively confirmed their sex, age, or build. They existed in the footage as an almost liminal figure, part ghost, part impersonator. Then came the appearance of another clue. A vehicle captured on surveillance cameras near a gun store about half a mile from the church. The car, a silver Nissan Altima, was seen driving slowly through the parking lot in the early hours before the murder. At one point, the driver turned off the headlights before turning them back on and exiting the frame. It was strange behavior, and police publicly appealed for information about the vehicle and its driver. However, no one ever came forward, and the vehicle was never positively identified. Authorities did not label it as directly connected to the crime, but its presence so close to the scene at a critical time continued to cast a shadow. All the while, the suspect remained elusive. No new footage emerged. No witnesses could recall seeing anyone dressed in tactical gear in the surrounding neighborhoods. No local retailers remembered selling matching clothing to any particular customer. It was as if the killer had emerged from nowhere and returned to it just as easily. That level of invisibility isn't common. It suggested either extreme planning or a level of detachment from the victim and the environment that allowed the attacker to vanish without attracting suspicion. From a criminological perspective, this lack of connection between the killer and the victim is significant. Most homicides, especially those involving blunt force trauma, are committed by someone known to the victim. Violence at this level is personal. It typically carries emotion, impulse, or familiarity. But in this case, everything about the attack felt cold, clinical. If the killer knew Missy, there was no visible evidence of that relationship. And if they didn't, then what brought them to that specific church at that specific hour? Was it a coincidence? A crime of opportunity? Or a fantasy acted out in reality for the first, and perhaps only, time? These are the questions that continued to haunt investigators long after the headlines faded. Missy Bevers was not just murdered. She was chosen, whether intentionally or by chance, and the act was committed in a space designed for reflection, faith, and safety. The contrast between the setting and the savagery of the crime became a symbol of its horror. And as the years passed, what lingered most was not just the brutality of the act, but the silence that followed it.